Role models. Are you a role model, Broedy?
I sure hope not.
You got kids, so you're gonna have to be some sort of upstanding and citizen, some sort of good example.
Yeah, I mean, we could try.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk
Yeah.
about it. Episode 53, Misfits. Roll those credits. From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA. Two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your professional misfits. All the way from Sydney, Australia, I am your host, Christopher Sellers.
And from Portland, Oregon, I'm Broedy Ipox.
And we are your professional misfits, where we riff on the B-sides of professional life. And today's episode is brought to you by IGU, an old game with a new twist where modern innovation and nostalgia come together to bring you Tag for today. It's really cool. You should check it out. The links will be in the description. And thanks for IGU for sponsoring the Misfits. Broedy, how are you?
I'm good. Flat, crazy, hectic couple of days, but I'm good, and I'm excited to record, and especially this episode because I told you last time we recorded. I think there's a lot that goes unsaid for this entirety of the subject, and I'm just excited. So, how about you?
Well, I'm okay. It's freezing cold here. It's freezing cold here in Oz, but we'll skip through that. All right, episode 53, Misfits. We're talking about role models today. Do you need them? What are they? Who are they? Who have they been to you, and what sort of impact they'll have on your development? Um, it's interesting because we naturally assume them to be good. Like all role models are good things, but I think as we get into this episode, we're going to scratch the surface a little bit and get into the deeper sort of spicier stuff. So let's start with the really obvious and simple things. Broedy, Ipox, role models. Do you have any? Have you had any? Who have they been to you?
Um, yes. So I have had role models. I don't think until recently I had even recognized who those were for me
Okay.
or why they were role models.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something that probably until like the last 5 years when I've looked into mentorship or things like that I've really looked at that. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I have some that are fictional characters. I have some that are writers. I have some that are people in my life,
Yeah.
real relationships that I have and people that I know. But I, the reason I was excited too is I just don't put too much into anybody, and God, that makes me sound like a douche. I
No, I think we'll get into that because I think you've
Yeah.
touched on something already that's a little bit interesting. Is if you think of, I don't know, role model buckets for want of an example, because they said don't put all your money in one bucket. You should have 4 or 5 different buckets earning your money. And the same thing with role models is like, are you really going to invest all of who you are and your identity into one person or one ideal?
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get into that as we go along. But yeah, I'll let you continue.
No. What about you? You got any that stick out that are just immediate kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
answers?
Yes. I mean, uh, yes, I've had some, and similar to you, like, you don't even always know. You don't probably might not realize it at the time, and then over a bit of time, you might realize that these particular role models aren't good for me. Like these archetypes of people that I seem to attract or draw into my life, because I think they're wise and all-knowing, um, aren't necessarily good for me. And then you sort of go on this pathway of like, well, whom am I supposed to follow, or like who's right, or like who's got some solutions, which probably part of the reason of this podcast.
Yeah.
It's like we'll discuss everything, but we'll solve nothing. But surely the conversation's more valuable than like just throwing mandates of knowledge and commandments at
Yep.
you. So to answer your question, I think that the simplest answer for me and probably for all of us is like our parents in some degree role model who we are,
Mhm.
the values that we're going to have,
I think that's
so,
a little less intentional though. Like
well,
it's just kind of by proxy. You know what I mean?
that's true, but that is true. All right, but I think there's two sides to this, which is worth diving into while we're here right now. Is number one, the people who sort of dismiss the impact that their parents might have on them and go, no, like just like they're just parents. They haven't actually modeled anything for me. So, but they probably have modeled more than you realize in terms of the sort of relationships you'll have, how you'll deal with problems, whether whether you talk about money, all of these things that you sort of inherit from your parents passively, whether you know it or not. There's that. But then you've also got the people who are like, well, my dad's my hero and he's my role model, and I went into the family business because he's been in the, I'm not to say that these are right or wrong, but they're two very different ends of the spectrum. And then there's someone like me, and perhaps even you, where it's like, look, yeah, I've learned a bit here. I also learned a lot of what I don't want, and that's not who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm not cut from the same cloth as my family, and you go out looking for belonging, and you're trying out different people and different scenarios and different things, and you're taking it a little bit like, this works for me, but this doesn't. This works for me, but this doesn't. Throwing back to another episode, I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, but when I was running the Kung Fu school, obviously my master, the guy who ran the joint, who taught me, he was absolutely a role model, like a walking god in my eyes. Absolute fountain of knowledge and wisdom and experience and all of those sorts of things. And so when it all tragically fell apart for all sorts of reasons, you then have to I have to come to terms with, like, this guy whom I thought was a god and revered really, really wasn't.
Yep. Just a man.
Right. But then what does that say of me if I put all this sort of faith in someone like that? But it came from an interesting conversation that I had with someone online recently when they were talking about mentorship, which is sort of a word that I really flinch at.
I hate it too. I hate it.
I guess,
especially because we're all grown ass adults. It's like, this is the Big Brother program. Like, what the fuck are we doing right now?
Yeah, and the whole corporate spin on mentorship and things like that. Just look, I can sort of appreciate the practice. I think it's just the packaging that I flinch at, to be honest. But it came up online, and it was something about mentorship and who are your mentors and why. And I commented, like, I don't think I've ever really ever had like a mentor, but it wasn't until like after the school lunch, much later in my late 20s and things, that when I'm writing and producing like my own work and my own theater and my own stuff, it took a director to notice what I was doing and then, I guess, support and encourage me. And that became like a sort of form of mentorship. But for me, all that was required was for someone to believe in me. Not they didn't have to teach me how to write. They didn't have to teach me how to perform, that's for sure. They directed my work, but it was that sort of support and sort of important encouragement that was necessary. So there's a handful, and there's probably one in particular for modern day Chris right now who I really admire, and I think for all of the right reasons. Like, in my view, he's the 1%. He's worked, he's done the work, has the wife, has the kids, has the finance, can live the lifestyle that he chooses to live. It's gives no fucks about social media or praise or roles or any of those sort of things, but then still operates it. Oh, Robbie.
Okay.
Yeah, Robbie.
That's
Robbie,
awesome.
in my view,
That's
Robbie,
awesome.
in my view,
Just
is
so
the 1%.
For the Misfits know, that's Chris's business partner.
For the
his
fintech
stuff on.
Yeah, and we wrote our books together and all of that, and then have developed quite a good friendship and now a working relationship as well. But I think part of the reason why we connect and why we get along so well is it's values based. It's values driven.
Mm.
And he can objectively recognize that I'm in a very different position than he is, but still values me as a contributor, as a co-founder, as a creator, as all of these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's really, really lovely to have, and have someone like that in your pocket and be available to you. So that okay. So there's a positive example of a potential role model. But the thing is, like, would I want Robbie's life? Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing that I did want to talk about a lot. I think there's a kind of stark perception that most people have when it comes to role models, and it turns almost into emulation, right? Like, I have to emulate this person or this framework for me to feel accomplished or secure in myself. That shit weirds me out. That shit. And I think that's like when I was referencing earlier, you know, I don't necessarily have one tried and true mentor, right? Or role model, because I just don't like the idea of, and you said it, and I wish I could repeat it the way that you said it. You said it beautifully just fucking 5 minutes ago. I'm not trying to become the person, right? But you know, I there are things I want to learn, and if I can take a little bit here and take a little bit there, that's the best case scenario for me. And I think a lot of people end up, you know, and I see it with my kids and their friends and Andrew Tate.
I knew he was going to come up at some point, but go on.
And now, look, I don't want to get bashed by all the misfits that potentially love Andrew Tate, but there's a ton of shit that I just do not agree with that comes out of this dude's mouth. Just a metric fuck ton of stuff. But what I do see is kids from maybe 10 to 18 years old are right now starved for what I think they would label as a male role model. And
all right, but so before we go there, that's sort of the underpinning question that I wanted to ask probably at the beginning is, do you think we need role models?
No, I don't. I personally, and
Really?
look, and look, I'll say it like this, and I say that with 5 kids. Now it's tricky for me because it's like you were talking about earlier. I think there's a lot of things passively that we inherit from people regardless. The way you eat, the way you spit, the way you talk, the way you move, those kind of things. I don't necessarily contribute that to being someone's role model, right? That's more or less your environment is the way that I kind of perceive that. And especially, and I might get grilled for this, but I hate thinking of your family as more of roles or characters and less as environment, because again, that's not necessarily something you run from and or choose for a good portion of your life. And again, that sounds like environment to me more than relationship. Granted, they are relationships. I'm not saying that they're not. I just think the whole dynamic is a little askew. And now, what you said earlier about parents being role models, I think it's kind of the anti-verse for most people. I think a lot of the times they hit that point that you're talking about where it's like, I've learned a ton from you. And yeah, I talk the same way, and the way that we say fuck sounds the same, and you know, all these little things. I'll keep that. I don't mind that. That was my environment. That's who I am. But I also am not going to take the things that I don't want from you anymore. And that's been a more pronounced message in my life than it has nitpicking things from people that are good, you know. And maybe that's that I'm less focused on those things. You know, the goods kind of just happen and I take them as they are, and you know, it is what it is. And the bad's a lot easier to be like, ooh, stay away, red flag kind of thing. But yeah, I personally don't think you need them, in the sense that I think, again, a lot of people move to emulation and idolization, and I think that's a fucking tricky, weird fucking place to be, because then you lose the core perspective that I'm trying to also figure out who I am, not who Broedy looks like as Andrew Tate, not,
Yeah.
all these different kind of, and it's weird because they, again, it feels like masks a lot. And when you look at it, I think guys like Andrew Tate and stuff aren't necessarily trying to get boys to put on the, oh, I'm big and tough and I make money kind of mask. I really truly don't. I think what they're saying is, you can be this guy. You can be this guy. You can, because look, I think, and
So,
this is one,
go on. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and this is one of the only reasons that I'm going to be honest with you that I agree with them, because, and this is maybe the misfit in me more than his perspective of being a man, right? But be who the fuck you are and do what you want to do, right? Like, that's, if you boil this dude's misogynistic, kind of crazy, eccentric message down to its simplest form, that's truly all he's saying to boys.
Cool. We're going to disagree. No. So just, well, how's this? Let's talk about male role models for a moment, and let's dig into this, because from what I've observed of Tate, I'd reason that his argument is the opposite. Is like, no, you should get buff, you should make money by any means necessary. What is it? Women are low IQ individuals. Like, literally, that's on repeat for Tate. So like, men are supposed to no. Men are supposed to do this. So, and he's like, and then he'll walk through his fucking apartment and he's like, here's the Bugatti, here's the car, here's the fucking right. So it's the capitalist fucking like bro dream. But but his speech is, you should be like me, because if you're not like me, then you're less than, and you're better, and you're a cock, and you're a simp, and all this sort of shit. So he plays straight into this fucking crowd. Now, we're talking about role models. Like, Tate's message is, you should be like me, because anything less is like weak and soft, and you'll never fucking succeed, and you'll never like whatever. That is an argument you can take. Good for you. But his motto is like, you should be like me. Like, you should, and you should aspire to be like me. Now, by comparison, if we're going to go with masculine role models, you've got a guy like Jocko Willink, like ex-Navy SEAL, has a podcast, does a book, and whatever else. But here's a guy, like, give or take his professional acumen. But here's a guy who's like competed at operated at an incredibly high level, which requires physical and mental discipline exceeding that of Tate's, in a professional capacity exceeding that of Tate's, right? And you don't hear him speak. Like, he has a wife and he has daughters, and never once have I heard him say, like, women are lower IQ individuals. This is a Navy SEAL who has respect for his wife, who has respect for his kids, has respect for women. I'm not done. You've got Peterson, right? And they've actually
Jordan
had a conversation.
Peterson, folks.
Correct.
Yep.
Right. So what you think of like his political leanings or whatever, but here you have a guy who isn't as physically fit as the other two examples, but is
Correct.
a clinical psychologist, very well educated, very well studied, articulate, takes a stance on certain topics, to be the academic, right? So again,
bold academic. Yeah.
Right. Again, a wife and daughters and Christian values. I've never heard him say like women are lower IQ individuals. And the two messages I get from Peterson and from Jocko Willink, at least, is this is what you can do if you commit to something. Like, commit to yourself, commit to discipline, commit to what's extreme leadership is Jocko Willink's fucking thing. Like, good for him. And the same thing, like what Peterson's book on like 12 rules for life is like, here's some rules, here's some principles. They might not be groundbreaking, but start somewhere, commit to them, see how they go, right? Tate's is the opposite. Tate's is a sales pitch. Be like me, do like me, hustle like me, con like me, treat women like me, and you will succeed. So this gets into the deeper question for me of like, not all role models are positive. Like, not all that's put in front of you as the paragon examples of masculinity or femininity, for that matter, is a good thing that we should emulate.
Right.
Is it
No,
not?
and I would hope that what I was saying about Tate wasn't taken as that. And look, I'll say what I kind of mean too. And what's interesting is, and I don't want to sit here and talk about Tate. I do not want to sit here and talk. He gets enough of that, right? Like this is kind of my point. He did something very controversial and edgy, which was tell women during a time period of women are the best, women are awesome, women are equal, that they suck and that feminism is bullshit. That gets latched onto so incredibly hard that anything that he says of value or in any type of nature outside of that has been dumbed down to that's what Tate is. And again, I don't give a fuck about Tate. I'm not personally a fan of him. I don't follow him. I'm not seeking his advice and he's not a role model of mine.
You didn't subscribe to Hustlers University?
No, but what I will say is that again, because I think when you look at boys that are looking for something, I mean something, truly, and I mean this, and I say this as a man and as somebody in the U.S. raising boys. There's not a ton of that out there right now. You've got drag queens, you've got transgender, you've got boys can be girls, you've got all this kind of shit. And again, I'm not looking for someone to come in and say those things are wrong and those things are less than. What I'm looking for is the other example, right? And for me, where Tate fills that space for a lot of boys is when you look at his shit and the things that my kids consume, it is not women are stupid. My kids will send me video after video of Tate talking about how much he values his brother. That's one of the things that I see continuously regurgitated from the boys that are following him, is that the men and the boys I have around me are important. And Tate does a fantastic job of fucking displaying that message and making sure that the people know that my brother and the people close to me are the ones that I'm going to care for. I don't give a shit about anybody else.
But not his sister and not his mom? Sorry, not to be that guy, but like...
No, I mean, and again, I don't want to sit here and talk, but no, look, but this is what I'm saying. You've taken a very convoluted message that people use to position against Tate. I'm not saying he hasn't said those things, that women are less than. He talks wonderfully about his wife. He talks wonderfully about his...
That's funny.
He talks wonderfully about his sisters. He talks amazingly about his mother. I mean, look...
But I've heard where he doesn't, where he's like straight off written them off because they don't talk to him because they're low IQ individuals, quote unquote. Anyway, let's get off Tate. Fuck him.
Yeah, but look, but this is something that I do want to say because it pertains to role models, right? One thing that I want the Misfits to take away from is, regardless of who you choose as a role model, there are going to be people that have reservations or even defenses against that particular person. Now, that should not sway you. Okay, do your own research, do your own shit, dive down. You know, whether it's Andrew Tate, whether it's Jordan Peterson, I don't give a fuck who it is. There is more to a person than what social media presents to weaponize that version of that person against them. And again, Tate signed up for that. Tate signed up. He said, I'm going to go and talk all this shit, and I want people to be pissed off and repost it and Dude, he's smart. You can be pissed off as much as you want about the things that he said and the things that he's done to do that, but he's making more fucking money than you or I probably will for a substantial amount of our lives. He's doing things that we don't have access to. He's meeting people that we might potentially never have access to. This is something that I want people to take a look at, is like, yes, you can shit on him all you want, but there are positives that you can take from a role model that you look at as that, degraded in your mind. Because again, that's not just what he's presented. That's not just what's there. And I, again, as somebody who could give two shits less about Andrew Tate, more so the fact that I'm sick of seeing people buy into this fucking cancel culture that is prominent everywhere. And he did it on fucking purpose. He said, I'm going to try to piss you the fuck off so I can get as far as I can get. And he talked about he talked about it all. So that's just my position of it. Is like, yes, do I think Andrew Tate's the fucking shining model of manhood? Absolutely the fuck not. I don't even model half of the fucking. I don't even model a fraction of anything that he's said into my own life. But there are things that I think he's saying and doing for people that need an influence in that area right now that not a lot of people are. And that's just me.
Right. So here's my final thought on all of that. Like, if young boys need a role model, Tate is the lowest bar you could possibly set.
I agree.
And that's right. And that's been accepted as like, holy fuck. Like, oh my God, leadership. Like, role models for young boys. And that's what fucking concerns me.
Well, I think
because we're gonna move on from this.
Oh yeah, I'm not talking about Tate anymore.
Cool.
Yeah.
My question for you is, like, as a dad, like, aren't you that guy? Like, isn't the way that you treat your sister, that you treat your family, that you treat Tiff, that you treat your kids, isn't that more of a stable, contextualized role model for young boys than anything external?
You would hope so. You would hope so, but that's not how it works. And I wish it did. I wish when I did something right, or I held my temper, or I just something to model. I wish that was received that way. That's not how it works. We're too close. We're around too often. That it's the thing is the lessons aren't learned until later. You know what I mean? It's almost exactly like I was talking about with mannerisms, right? Like kids, right? I can teach them and I can talk to them and I can practically speak to them and I can explain things. It's just not how it fucking works. Like and it's almost like you said, I just have to live by example redundantly in hopes that instead of being
something's absorbed,
taught, it's absorbed, right? And like that's again the thing that I will say about role models that I don't agree with the things that they're doing and things like that. I think what happens is, like I talked about, I think even with my kids, I don't necessarily want my kids to be me. So don't emulate me. You know what I mean? Don't try to copy who I am. Do I like when you wear a hat or you put on glasses and say I look like that? Of course. I love it. And I'll tell you, you look like me, or oh, daddy's a little guy, or whatever the hell they want to hear. But at the same time, I'm in the position that my sole objective in my life as a parent is to help them figure out who they are and what they want from me. Because I'll tell you what, that wasn't given to me by my parents. And I just don't think they had the scope. I don't think they had the intention. And I don't think they just had the awareness that it took to get to that place where it's like, as much as, yes, I would love four little versions of me, I don't at the same time. I want to see who they are. I want them to be who they're going to be. And I think that's the tricky thing about becoming a role model, right? Is like, again, I can do these things that I hope are positive and that they'll, absorb or emulate in the future. But at the same time, me sitting here and forcing myself to eat all the greens or go to the gym every single fucking day and David Goggins this fucking shit, like that it just, like it's not in my cards anyways. I mean, if somebody else as a parent took that position and that's how they wanted to be a role model for their kids, I'm not going to shit on that. It's just, like I said, I view it a little bit differently because I think even inherently, if we don't mean to, that's what we do is we nitpick. We don't really latch on to one person. Even the Spider-Man fanatic, or the David Goggins nut, or even the Tate boys. Like if you look at a lot of them, they have a shit ton more role models or influences far outside of that. And as you should. Like I said, I think one of the things that I was hoping to talk about on this episode that kind of leans into where we're at with the negative side of role models is again, that push for people to find one. That was always weird to me. That shit was weird to me, because I'll tell you, when my dad realized, he was like, oh, okay, my son's a little bit different than me, he's gonna need a role model that's not me. That fucking bothered me as a kid. That fucking bothered me. And then the pushing towards other people was almost like, dude, it's the same thing. I'll pick it up as I go, let me watch is the biggest thing that I felt as a kid. It was like, you're trying so goddamn hard to figure me out that you think you know who I am before I am him. That's not how that shit works. What the fuck? And then you're going to decide who's going to be my role model. That's fucking strange. I should be deciding. I should choose. I should fucking, that should matter to me, not somebody else. So as much as, people can be negative role models, I think people can push you into the situation of mentorship or role models, and that be just as negative too. Now, is my dad not enough? Wait a second, bro. Are you telling me I shouldn't be like you? Or are you telling me I can't be like you?
Right.
And either one of those scenarios as a young kid is fucked. I'm sorry. It was not an easy thing to deal with as, for myself. And then again, I think that's why my tendency to look away from any particular individual came from was, okay, well, shit, if you're not it, then I'm sure as hell not going to go looking for somebody random to fill that fucking spot. And I wonder, has there ever been in your life or moment, not necessarily someone that's been a bad role model, that you've noticed you've been pushed into that situation, that it's like, either just by happenstance or environment, they're around you all the time and it is what it is, or somebody did try to push, like, because you're an arts kid and you've explicitly said that Glenn and your mom aren't necessarily in that bucket, you know what I mean? So did they ever try? Was it ever like, was there a guy in the back running the theater and they're like, hey, you should probably talk to him because we have no fucking idea how to. Good for them.
Well,
good for them.
Yeah, they were hands off in that respect. I mean, apart from, not in the case of having a role model, or even if you want to extrapolate that out, like going to church and having Jesus as your role model,
right?
For instance, there was never that. We were a-religious, agnostic, basically, and no particular. No, they were really hands off in that respect. I think because they didn't know what to do. Like, it's like Chris is. I don't know how young they would have realized, like, Chris is different for whatever reason, because I was still trying to push me to go to uni while I was at a kung fu school. So for them it was education and stability, and the piece of paper will solve all of your problems, and it never did. And so but it's being pushed into a role model, no. But like listening to you talk before about the pros and cons of role models and this and that, and specifically about men, of course it makes me wonder about young women. What, for all the talk of young boys need this, it's like, sure, nothing exists in isolation. So if we're gonna have relationships, socially, romantically, interpersonally, whatever, what about young women? Like, what positive role models do young women seek out? And for what reasons? I think this starts to get into the deeper purposes and purposes of having role models or seeking out people like this. Is like, for what reason? Like, what are you trying to learn or to gain? If you're probably approaching it in the wrong way, you're looking to fill something.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people will seek out a role model or align themselves with a role model type in order for that praise, in order for that acceptance and acknowledgement. It's a big one in the arts. It's massively identifiable in the arts because you want to be praised and applauded and told you're special. You know what I mean? And so that's why a lot of people fall into the arts bucket, is they might not have had this at home. They might not have had this recognition or identity, so they fall into these sort of industries because that's where they'll get the sort of attention or appreciation they feel they're lacking, right?
Interesting.
Right, and look, and this plays all the way through corporate as well. Like you have a need to please the boss because then they'll recognize your good work, and it incentivizes you for all these sorts of reasons. So professionally, you might look at someone who's higher up as some sort of role model, you know. But also the standards for men and women are very, very different in terms of what they see as admirable, what they would seek to emulate.
Drastically so, yeah.
Yeah. And without necessarily having any women on the podcast this season, I'm not going to go out of my way to speculate like whom would be a female role model, but I think it's really really worth considering because I don't know, in the age of social media, like, and everyone sort of putting themselves like forward and front and whatever else, like,
yeah, almost like a pick me kind of culture. Yeah, emulate me. Yeah, I think.
Right, and then it's doing whatever you can in order to beat the algorithm, to be seen. Like going back to your Tate example, like the more extreme things get, and trust me, and here's a bold prediction of mine. Like with the adoption of AI, like with the mass adoption of AI and the democratization of content, you're just going to see humans become more and more extreme in order to peak on the algorithm. So, because
you're
AI
going
is
to
going
see it.
Of course. So like AI is going to flood everything with everything PG and generic, I should say. So you're going to see like a mass escalation for all these things. Now, hopefully you're also going to see a mass rejection and see people backtrending and go, well, I want something I know I can actually trust and rely on, and something that is authentic rather than just like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully. But it's like, so back to my sort of two original points is number one, for all the 30% of misfits who are female listening, hi, who are your role models?
Yeah.
And why? And then for all the misfits who are listening, like, why do we seek these role models out? Like once we've moved past the passive stage of, our parents, like Broedy was saying, like that's passive and that's situational. Like I have no choice but to sort of adopt, them. And then once you hit sort of adolescence and getting into like your early 20s, you should be starting to challenge these assumptions and decide for yourself. So by the time you're moving through 20s and 30s, you can pick and choose who's in your circle and why, and whom you emulate and why. Like a simple example of mine. I mean, I've mentioned Robbie before, but a semi role model of mine is Nietzsche, and I love Nietzsche's work for one reason, kind of in particular, is he was a student of Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer was the saltiest philosopher that ever lived. Like the ultimate pessimist. He believed that the purpose of life is meaningless because man's will and struggle fundamentally amounts to nothing.
Yep.
So that was his view. And Nietzsche modeled himself on that. Is like the way to avoid pain is to live in a small fireproof room to insulate you from the world. That's the only way to avoid it, right? And that seemed like the most sensible German Austrian thing to do. Then it wasn't until sort of later in life where Nietzsche spent a summer, I think in Spain or Italy, in the Mediterranean. The weather was warm. He ate bread with olive oil instead of butter and all these sorts of things, and enjoyed ocean air. And he had the realization that if the world is great suffering, that it equally has the potential for great enjoyment and great fulfillment. And then Nietzsche, he began to theorize that, like, if if one is possible, then the other is possible, but they wouldn't be possible in isolation. So your capacity for suffering or great suffering is equal to your capacity for great joy, for great love, for all of these things. And that shifted his view 180 on the world, and that's where he started to develop some of his really great works that have like lasted for the test of time. And and this is why I love him. Like he would famously send Christmas cards, birthday cards to friends and family and write letters like wishing them disappointment and betrayal and heartbreak, because
Yes,
he knew
I've read that. Yes.
Yeah. So going through these trials would give you the strength and the resilience and the tools to then emotionally and psychologically cope with life and like overcome great things. That was his sort of logic. And so I've got one of his quotes on the wall. I can't read it right now because it's in the other room, but that's basically what it equates to. Like no one is like a genius or produces a great work like immediately. There must come suffering, there must come frustration, there must come envy of others. And through that, if should you pursue, you will achieve great things. Now, do I envy the fact that Nietzsche was a loner for most of his life, mostly a pessimist? I think he died alone. No, but do I really respect the ethic and philosophy of his work? Yes, that's something that kind of keeps me up at night. That keeps me alive in the morning. You know, so when if you were here in the last 2 episodes, or even for the last 3 seasons, 4 or 5 seasons, you will hear me talk of my frustration of not getting the thing that I want in the time that I want, by the time that I want it, and what the fuck. Like, why can't I move the globe on my shoulders? And so I'll cling to Nietzsche, going, this is teaching me, hopefully, that the skills and the resilience, so when the time comes, I will be able to, like, with some grace and humility, appreciate it. We'll see.
I actually really like knowing them about you. Not that I couldn't have connected it myself, but no, I mean it's interesting too, because we have these conversations, and I mean, on the planet, I mean, practically speaking, I probably know you better than most people, and when you come to these moments where you're like, oh, where did that come from for Chris? And then it clicks when you're speaking about it, and
right.
The experience makes sense. You're like, holy shit, that you make so much more sense to me. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a very interesting thing. I wonder if more often than not, if there was a fucking exercise that was like, who's your 3 role models? And you're like, someone famous, someone in real life, and someone fictional. And then you find the commonality between the 3. And just like you're talking about with Nietzsche, like you can understand the thing that's getting you up to understand them, and then because you have that perspective, how much deeper can you go, and how much more substantially would you be impacted by it, because that's just very cool. That's just interesting. Okay. I like I said, I kind of knew it, but not in that kind of articulated way.
So this is why, like, why do we need role models, right? And so for me personally, I guess in this particular case, it humanizes the struggle, because there's some sort of reflection that what you're going through has been gone through before by someone. And if we're being really objective, this even gets back to like you and talking about Tate. It's like if you're this guy, I used to be that guy, and I can do these things, and look where I am now. Okay. But there's millions of dead people who've written good books. Like, go and search a little something in there. There's a million sports people who've achieved amazing, remarkable things. Go and find something in there. There's a million academics and artists. Artists famously all have this story of like overcoming something, or some great tragedy, or some great trauma, or whatever, to achieve the work. And so grab those I think grab those little gems from each and every one to and to sift for gold on your own.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Just for fun, let's what are those three for you? Something fictional, some
Okay.
you listed somebody real.
Yes.
You've also listed somebody famous.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's funny.
So you're
when you said
fictional. Who's your fictional role model? I suppose
it was Astro Boy.
Really, I love Astro Boy. A lot of people don't know how deep his
Bro.
story really is.
I'm fairly sure as a kid I modeled my entire morality on Astro Boy. The Mighty Atom.
Not a bad one to model, my friend. Not a
Right?
bad one to model. What in
So,
particular stood out for
it
you?
was I think it was the it's altruistic beliefs. It's like we're all, like, we're all robots, but like we're all equal. We all have different values. Like not judging at sort of face value and sort of like yeah, it's all of that. And I can't quite put it into words at the moment, but I deep childhood emotional impact. Still, I'm still a super fan. Going back and watching it as an adult was like, Jesus Christ, there's a lot of upskirt in like 1978 anime. It's just a lot of upskirt. Mate, Uranus is supposed to be your sister, and she's probably only about 8. Like, fucking hell. But yeah, I like huge fan of Astro Boy.
Interesting.
All right, so for you.
Well, I mean, so Spider-Man would be the most obvious answer that I could give you. I thought about
Peter
this
Parker?
for the episode. Peter Parker specifically,
Okay.
right? Now, when I started writing my notes for this episode, it brought up a ton of my really young childhood shit, because I was trying to, for me, I was trying to understand why Spider-Man. And there's a ton of noble traits. He's really fucking cool. There's all these things, but something had to point me in that direction beforehand, is what I kind of felt. It was the Disney classic Robin Hood. As a fucking kid, that was my guy. He was funny, and he was witty, and he was quick, and he was a philanthropist, and there was just so many things that I, as a kid, didn't realize meant what they meant to me. But it was Robin Hood. It was Robin Hood for a long, long time. Then Aladdin came out, and it was Aladdin, and it was, and I started
it's
to
my favorite Disney of all time. By the way,
mine as well.
Okay, I could sing all the songs, but I won't.
But no, look, I started to identify that it was the kind of solo, outcasted, still wanting to be noble kind of kid that struck me every fucking time, whether it was Robin Hood.
Poor boy gets the princess. Yeah.
Right, dude. And yeah, so I'd say fictionally it was those guys. And I don't necessarily know if it was more so for just the nobility itself, or for the actual message, steal from the rich, give to the poor. Because, like, I really still fuck with that shit.
So what about the living and famous?
Okay. Living. And I thought about this before the episode. It was my grandfather. And now this is really interesting to me because I'm not talking about my dad's dad, who was a Navy pilot and who was successful, and he was kind-hearted and he was funny. He was an amazing role model. My mother's father. And the reason that I say that, and he wasn't successful financially. He wasn't this guy with a crazy amount of accolades through his life or anything like that. What struck me as him being the role model is he was somebody that I think wanted so desperately not to be part of the mundane, but realized that that's kind of 90% of us,
Mm.
like that's you are you know, a lot of people are that statistic of the average. And now I'm not saying he was my role model because he was okay being average. It was the grace that he had within that that I have modeled today. And he didn't even realize how good he was. He didn't even realize how kind he was. He didn't even
Mm.
realize how strong he was or how hardworking he was, because he had almost discredited himself so often as average. That's why he was my hero. Is he was more than he was,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
that's that's rare. I think that's rare in people. I think oftentimes it's the other. I'll put on the mask, or I'll tote that I'm that guy, or I'll play the part until they believe me, kind of thing. And he was so okay with just being, you know what I mean? Just being. That I didn't have a lot of that in my life. I think I had a
Mm.
lot of people that were really discontented with their position and who they
Mhm, mhm.
were and life itself. And so, yeah, he's not living anymore, but somebody I knew. And yeah, that's why. And then somebody famous, I'd probably say Robin Williams.
Okay.
And a lot of people too would be like, "Oh, is it because he's funny or whatever?" Because I try to be witty as I can, but it really wasn't the humor. It was, again, kind of almost that realization that it didn't matter at what pinnacle of success I could be at, sadness was going to follow me. And it was my job to tell people that you could choose to be happy. And that's what I took away from him every
Mhm.
fucking time. And even some of his speeches that are a little bit sad in the undertones, I didn't take the sadness from him, even though that's what he was displaying. And that's why he was my role model, is, even though everyone knew that Robin Williams had a sadness in him,
Mm.
it is not what you saw. It is not what you saw. You saw the laughs, and you saw the impact, and you saw the joy and the goofiness and the willingness to connect to anyone for any fucking particular reason. And that was so much more real to me than the people that be like, "Oh yeah, but he's kind of a sad guy." It's like, okay, so are you. You just don't fucking tell people. God
Yeah.
damn. So yeah, those are mine. Those are mine.
All right. There you go, Misfits. There's some role models. And if nothing else, like, have a think about who yours are and why,
Mm-hmm.
and what you're getting from them. Yeah, and again, for the 30% of women that listen, shout out the charms. Who are your role models and why? I'd be really fascinated to know without like jumping to assumptions.
Right, because the assumptions I would make are probably so fucking far. Like, instantly, my knee jerk reaction is like Oprah and like fucking
Right.
Martha Stewart. Like, fucking no, like, actually don't have an idea. So please.
And similarly, when like in the age of OnlyFans, when that's front and center, like how is that not the female equivalent of Tate? You know what I mean?
Right, right,
So
right.
that's a discussion well worth having. But that should wrap us up for episode 53. Thanks for joining us, Misfits. Episode 54, Broedy, do you know what's coming up next?
I don't. I don't even care.
Everyone take
I
a
didn't.
drink.
I
5
didn't
seasons
even
in.
look. Be a loner.
Actually, that's it. So you can take half a drink. So episode 54, we're talking about how to be a loner and why you should. Like having friends and having a community and everything else is great, but there is times and places and definitive reasons why you should be a loner, not just for all the introverts, but for everyone else out there. Broedy, any first thoughts on what's coming up?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to like a philosophy I follow. If I'm not comfortable with myself, then why should anybody else be?
You do have to live with yourself for the rest of your life.
Every
So
day.
it is something worth figuring out. So on that note, Misfits, you can find us at promisfitspodcast.com. You can listen to us on YouTube and on Spotify. You can find us on Patreon by go to promisfitspodcast.com and follow the link to Camp Misfit and get all your Misfit merch and support us. I need coffee. Broedy needs glasses. Thanks to IGU for supporting this episode. And in the meantime, I've been Chris.
I've been Broedy.
And you stay classy, Misfits, and we'll see you on the next one.